Hi everyone, and welcome to my 5th episode of the Zero to KSM Challenge series. Before we begin, I just want to apologise for the delay in videos. As the summer vacation has ended here, I'm returning to work teaching full time and as such don't have much time to work on editing videos. We're starting the week at 1806 Mythic Plus rating and 418 item level. We're nearing the end of the challenge, which is to reach a total rating of 2000 for the Keystone Master Achievement. As always, I begin by looting my Great Vault. I completed 10 dungeons last week, giving me 3 options to choose between. The choices are a Ring of Frozen Rain, Blood Elder's Bindings, or Treads of Restored Order. I ended up going with the Ring of Frozen Rain, primarily because it was a mythic level item, which means I could upgrade it to 447 item level if I deemed it necessary to do so. The affixes for this week are Tyrannical, Volcanic, and Sanguine, so I'll have to be watching my own feet as well as the mobs, making this week focused primarily on positioning. At this stage of the challenge, I felt like I wouldn't be changing my gear too often, and as I had a surplus of gold, I went to the AH to pick up some enchants for my weapons, rings, pants, and chest pieces. With my gear enchanted, it was time to start my push to 2000 rating. As this was the second set of Tyrannical dungeons I was doing during this challenge, I prioritized the dungeons that I had a low level key completion on, or that I had not yet done on a Tyrannical week. My item level isn't particularly high, which can make getting into groups for plus 16s and above difficult. In the end, the first dungeon I got invited to is a 14 Alderman, a key which I had not yet touched on a Tyrannical week. The first group of this week was looking particularly pink, with 3 paladins. Starting off the dungeon, I made the usual pull of the initial 3 packs, popping cooldowns while trying to interrupt casts as I could. I initially forgot that it was a Sanguine week, but quickly realised once I saw the pool spawn. Just as the mobs were about dead, I chain pulled into the 2 Geomancers, and here we had our first death. The paladin healer died. I'm not 100% certain what killed him, but I believe it was a combination of volcanic and getting hit by the AoE slam from the mob. Nevertheless, I continued to self-sustain and waited for the healer to get back to us, and continued on clearing to the first boss. Despite the rocky start, there were no more deaths until we had reached the Lost Dwarfs. The first half of the encounter went great with no issues at all. People seemed to be avoiding mechanics and positioning properly. With this being a Tyrannical week, the bosses are significantly more deadly, so it's always good to see people respecting the mechanics. After the longboat ride, there wasn't much room as everyone spread out for the mechanic rather than stacking. We lost our shaman to one of the orange swirls, which he very quickly used his Ankh for. At the very end of the boss, with 1 dwarf remaining, our shaman died once again. We finished off the boss, rezzed, and began making our way to Bromac with our death tally at 3. We had no deaths on the way to Bromac himself. The trash went down easily. With it being a Tyrannical week, the trash really isn't much of a threat unless I make a large pull. Bromac himself went great, at least until the halfway point of the fight, where our shaman died once again during a quaking totem. He was combat res rather quickly. After another 1 minute of fighting, the boss eventually fell, bringing our death total up to 4. Once the boss was down, we made our way to Sentinel Telonrus. I did pull most of the mobs on the way to Telonrus at the same time, as they are custodians that use the Jagged Bite ability. All I needed to do was keep threat on them and continually kite them, as they move fairly slow and are not difficult to kite at all. The third boss himself went down very easily. We had no deaths and no close calls either. Clearing the way to Emberon didn't take very long. We had no deaths on the way. Emberim himself, however, was another story. During the first set of unstable embers, our healer was very low and died once the debuff expired. He did eventually get combat rezzed while I continued to self-sustain on the boss. I feel like Emberon is one of the bosses I could solo at this level given enough time, so wasn't too worried. On the very next set of Burning Embers, the healer dropped very low and then got hit by one of the fires that move around the moon, causing him to die just moments after he got rezzed. Our shaman was also low from the embers, and a few seconds later also died. Myself and the 2 remaining paladins continued to fight the boss, with the paladins self-healing themselves as needed. After the first intermission was over, our combat res was off cooldown, so we resed the healer for him to only once die again very shortly after. With us being a DPS and a healer down, our paladin DPS having to use some GCDs to heal, the rate at which we could kill the boss was significantly reduced, and due to this we had to go through 2 intermission phases, consuming a lot of time in the process. Despite all of this, we killed the boss, bringing our total death count up to 8. With 1 boss remaining, we rezzed everyone and made our way deeper into the dungeon. It was here where I had my first death. I took a large chunk of damage when 3 mobs all used their cleave ability at the same time, which brought me low, and then I died very shortly after. I did release and start making my way back, as we had no combat reses remaining. During this time, the rest of the group slowly died. Our first wipe bringing us up to 13 deaths in total. Other than this one wipe, we had no more deaths on the way to the final boss. By the time we reached the final boss, I knew there wasn't enough time to kill the boss before the timer ran out. But as long as I completed the dungeon without taking too much longer, I'd still get a large amount of rating. The boss went well. It could have been better, but everyone was spreading out, causing us to begin running out of space towards the end of the fight. And at the very last 1% of the boss, our shaman died once again to the wing buffet ability. We killed the boss, being a minute and a half over time, but still gaining 62 rating, bringing me up to a total of 1,868. No loot, but at this stage I already have enough gear to complete the challenge. I returned to Valdrakken and began looking for another group, getting invited to a 14 Neltharis. The group consisted of a priest, hunter, paladin and mage. The first pull, I gathered the first and second packs of mobs together, and while fighting them, the pack that controls nearby also got pulled. I picked up the mobs, and as they were about to die, chain pulled them into the next pack. This was a mistake. It was here where we had a molten core cast go off. I take responsibility for this, as my interrupt was up and I should have gotten it. The stacking debuff eventually became too much for the group and we wiped. Running back to the pack, it appears that one of the elementals had bugged. The molten core ability wasn't removed and the ad was continuously pulsing out the debuff. I pulled it and the group tried to kill it, but for some reason they focused on the other elemental first, allowing the debuff to stack up too high and killing us. At this point, the paladin DPS left and the group disbanded. I was determined to get a Neltharis key completed, as I was already at the dungeon and still missed the tyrannical key for my rating. I ended up getting invited into the hunter's key from the previous group, a now 13 Neltharis. I felt like I owed the hunter for failing and depleting his previous key, so I don't mind that it was only a level 13 key. The run went far better this time. Starting off the dungeon, I made a rather large pull to test out the changes to the chain mechanic, pulling the mobs on the left side and the right side of the room to the chain so that we could use them to quickly kill the group of mobs. I'm not sure if this is still the meta strategy for this dungeon or not. Either way, it seemed to work and we killed a large cluster of mobs without any deaths and continued up to Magma Tusk. We also managed to kill Magma Tusk without any issues whatsoever. Shortly after Magma Tusk, I made another large pull so that we could utilize the chains. I grouped all of the mobs and pulled them towards the chain. I struggled to click the chain and let the cast go through due to all of the frontals I was trying to avoid. Once I got the chain, I unfortunately died before being able to break it on the mobs. Luckily, the shaman managed to break his chain, stunning the mobs, allowing me to get combat resed in the meantime. The party kited the ads around a little while I tried to re-establish aggro, eventually succeeding and finishing off the remaining mobs. I then made another large pull for everyone that didn't use the chains on the prior pull, pulling everything in the room up to the boss. They were quickly killed with the chains and we continued on killing Chargath without any issues. After Chargath there was one more big pull to do. All the mobs in the next room grouped together and chained down as the cooldowns were already expired. It always feels very satisfying to make good use of the chains and is probably one of my favourite aspects about Neltharis. That makes it unique. We killed the room of mobs and continued making our way to the Forge Master. I pulled one of the packs of mobs on the side of the Forge Master's room. It was here where we had our second death in the run. The priest managed to aggro another pack of mobs next to the Forge Master. The blacksmith placed his debuff onto the priest, which ticked a couple of times before eventually killing him. Not a big problem. I got aggro on the ads and we killed them before rezzing the priest. We cleared the remaining packs and took on the Forge Master himself. At around 30% on the Forge Master we had a death. The boss used his Blazing Aegis ability and those afflicted spread out. However, our shaman's position was quite unfortunate. The swirls completely engulfed the area he was in, making it very difficult for him to avoid and resulting in his death. They were combat rezzed quickly and we proceeded to kill the boss without any more problems. 3 bosses in and 3 deaths. We jumped down to the initial starting room to begin making our way to the Warlord. Nothing too interesting happened on the way to the Warlord. We cleared the trash without any deaths and started the final boss with 12.5 minutes remaining. I do enjoy this boss. The interaction of the shield and extra action ability is very satisfying if timed correctly. The boss himself was going down very quickly. The first magma shield broke without any problems. We reached the second magma shield, and while it wasn't broken instantly, it was broken rather quickly, after only a few swirls had managed to make it out. Unfortunately, our Shadow Priest, while running from the swirls placed under him, ran into the circles surrounding our healer, which killed him. We did have a combat res, got him back up, and as the boss was only at 25% remaining health, he quickly fell before the third magma shield could be casted. 4 bosses and 4 deaths in. We completed the run achieving a +2 to the key and gaining myself more mythic rating, taking me to a total of 1925. I also ended up receiving a pair of Lava Bearer leg wraps. Before continuing to the next dungeon, I noticed the Time Rift event was starting. I quickly ran it and bought myself some gloves. After this, I ran to the Catalyst room and upgraded the legs and gloves I just acquired into tier pieces, granting me my 4 set bonus. I also spent whatever crests I could to upgrade gear at this time, bringing my total item level up to 420. With less than 100 rating to go, I started applying to more groups for dungeons that would increase my rating significantly. I eventually got invited into a Freehold 4T. Quite a few deaths happened over this course of the run. The first death occurred when I was making a large pull while clearing out the council or captain's area. I was taking heavy damage and had to resort to kiting the mobs a little while waiting to get topped and for CDs to return. During this time, our priest and hunter died. After finishing off the remaining mobs, we regrouped and pulled the boss. The Council or Captains is a boss where I feel like a lot of the groups I join frequently have people die. Not long into the boss fight, one of the bosses jumps away and begins using its grape shot ability across the arena. Our priest got hit by one of these but managed to survive. Our Havoc Demon Hunter, however, was not so fortunate, getting hit twice and dying. On the boss's next cast of the ability, we rezzed the Demon Hunter when it was safe to do so, only for him to get targeted by the Blackout Barrel and taking another grape shot to the face before we could free him, resulting in him dying again very quickly. Despite being a DPS down for the majority of the fight, it did eventually go down. We rezzed the Demon Hunter and began to clear out more of the trash. While clearing our way to the Ring of Booty, we had quite a few deaths. The first death was due to the Demon Hunter being targeted by the Blind Rage and just face tanking the mob, resulting in him taking too much damage for the healer to keep up and dying. He released and ran back, and I chain pulled into the next pack of mobs. Somehow I also managed to aggro the mobs that patrol under the bridge. making this a much bigger pool than I had originally planned. The healer then died off my screen, to which my response was to start kiting the mobs, but we slowly began losing other members of the group. The healer managed to rejoin me and the rest of the group caught up too as I continued to kite. We lost the demon hunter once again, but managed to stabilize and finish off the mobs. We finished clearing the trash around the ring of booty while waiting for the RP to finish. On the shark puncher we did lose our healer to one of the sharks, however he did get back up once his spirit form ended. Not too long after, however, we did get one more death. The paladin tried to tank one of the sharks while healing himself. Unfortunately for him, his heals were not enough and he did die. By this stage the boss was around 25% health. We did eventually down the boss. The fight itself brought us up to 12 deaths total as we began to make our way to the final boss of the instance. I'd love to say that we had no more deaths for the rest of the dungeon, but that would make me a liar. Our kill on Harlan was very messy. In the final phase of the boss we had quite a few deaths. Firstly, we lost the demon hunter and hunter. Both didn't dodge and got hit by the whirlwind ability. Very soon after, the boss used his cannon barrage ability, and since they were low, they died to the damage that occurs during this mechanic. Then the healer didn't notice the ad spawn and ran directly into it, causing it to explode, killing itself and the priest at the same time. We did, however, still manage to kill the boss. We ended up finishing the run in time. I didn't get any loot, but I did raise my rating up to 1958. The final dungeon I ran was a 14 Brackenhide. The dungeon started off great with no deaths up to the first boss. I find the Hack Claws warband to be the make or break point of the dungeon for most groups. Usually if you can beat this boss, I find that the other bosses are not quite so challenging. We pulled the boss, and on the first Gash Frenzy, we lost our monk and mage. We had not used Bloodlust at this stage, so I decided to reset the boss, re-resed everyone, and tried again. The second attempt went better, but not by much. During the totem mechanic, the DPS killed the totem, however the healer didn't dispel me. I was in between the boss and the targeted player, however I couldn't control my character. I couldn't use my mitigation and took a very large hit which instantly killed me. A few of the members of the group followed me in death and the remaining ones managed to reset the boss for the third attempt. On to the third attempt. Thankfully no one seems to have left yet. Although my concerns were growing about my healer, they seemed a little inexperienced, but nothing we couldn't compensate for. This attempt went much better. We did have one death on the second Gash Frenzy, however we still got the boss down, leaving us at a total of 6 deaths after the first boss. However, from this point on, I feel like the dungeon does get easier. It felt like things were getting better. We cleared all the trash on the way to Treemouth without any problems. We also managed to kill Treemouth without any deaths, but this was expected as he is a very simple boss, with not too much damage output. We then cleared all the way to Gutshot, once again with no deaths. However, it was here where we had our 7th death of the run. Our monk got hit by 2 chomping bites and died at around 30% into the boss. And we also lost our mage, as he was slow to react to the fixate, and I got knocked back into the trap he was trying to use. Despite the loss of 2 DPS, we soldiered on and got the boss down. With Gutshot down, we were on the final stretch of the dungeon with 10 minutes remaining. We did have one more death while clearing on the way to the final boss. After the skipping the pack of Rot Hexers, I pulled the double Filth Caller pack. They went down very quickly, but unfortunately so did our hunter, as he stood on the Sanguine Pool at the same time a cast was being finished and died. Other than this one death, we had no more on the way to Rathai. We got to the final boss of the dungeon with 5 minutes left. An easy task if nothing goes wrong. I pulled the boss and we began the fight, making sure to position the boss in a way that would cause the totem to spawn in a good position for the DPS, without getting hit by the giant whirlwind that moves around the room. We got the boss down without a death. It was here, when the boss fell, that an achievement popped up on my screen. Dragonflight Keystone Season 2 Master. Completing the dungeon granted me 64 rating, pushing me up to 2022 rating in total, completing the challenge that I had set out. Overall, I feel like this challenge wasn't too difficult, only taking 2.5 weeks to complete. It was a very fun experience. The Demon Hunter class was extremely enjoyable and fun to play, although I'm not a big fan of its initial AoE threat generation. Definitely, if I were to attempt this challenge again, I would look at aiming for Keystone Hero instead of Keystone Master, as it was a little bit too easy. I don't plan to do another challenge like this until Season 3 however. If you'd like to see me do this on a specific class or role, please don't hesitate to mention it in the comments. As of right now, I'm investing some of my time into classic hardcore servers. If you want to check out my progress, please do join the live stream, the links are below. That's all for this series. I do hope you enjoyed following along with me on my journey, and if you did like the series, please do give the video a like, comment and subscribe, as it does help out the channel immensely. Have a good one, and see you next time.